However, within the first 48 to 72 hours, the checkpoint was compromised by a suicide explosion.
Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
The single greatest sacrifice I've made is my family.
We weren't out there to take country. We were out there to do something. That was our job.
I did feel a lot of regret.
Friends were still getting killed.
It got to the point where, you're going to funerals quite often.
Do I lead under fire?
And that was a heavy responsibility, I guess, on my shoulders that I didn't want to screw up.
You have to be resilient to get a cope.
War itself is horrific. It's a horror story. It should never be dressed up as if it's something glorious.
Not what you can do for yourself, but what can you do for your country.
The volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Gareth Gardner served in the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, deploying as a driver to Timor-Leste and Afghanistan. He transitioned from digger to officer, becoming a tank commander. Gareth spoke to Thomas Kaye about his military service, his love for teaching and instructing, and the work he's doing today with Veterans Employment Program company WithYouWithMe.
I'm Thomas Kaye, speaking today with Gareth Gardner. Gareth, welcome to Life on the Line.
Hi, Thomas. It's a pleasure to meet you.
So let's start things off at the beginning. What can you tell us about your upbringing?
I came from a largely military family. My father served in the Vietnam War, preferably from Australia, supporting as an intelligence analyst. Before that, my grandfather was in the Navy in the Korean War. So there was a bit of a family history in the military. And since I signed up and joined the military, two of my three brothers have also signed up and served. My upbringing as a family was mostly boisterous with three brothers, so four boys in total. And we grew up on a farm, and I think the army was a natural call to adventure for all of us.
What started that conversation with the uniform with yourself and your father, your grandfather?
Yeah, I think both my father and my grandfather were actually pretty repressed on their military service. They had difficult experiences, mostly because of the time. My grandfather strongly suffered PTSD as his experiences in the Korean War. And my father was pretty close about his experiences of the Vietnam War. So it was probably almost that secretive nature as well that I think was an appeal for me. And I first I found a resonance with the military when I joined Army Cadets as a young teenager in my high school.
Was Army Cadets sort of that first foot in the door, sort of to get some idea of kind of what it's all about? Yeah,
for me, definitely. I wanted to learn more about it. I wanted to be involved, and I immediately resonated with the regimented lifestyle, the structure. At the time, I was also at a boys' Catholic college, which was very structured and had close ties with the military and the local reserve unit. So all of that really, really resonated with something that I was craving for as a young boy.
So moving on from cadets, from that, you're inspired to sign up, and I believe, was that during the HSC?
Yeah, I loved Army Cadets so much that I couldn't wait to join. I know my parents were probably pushing me to go to university and to study science and go on and have a career, but the call to adventure was too great, and the appeal to serve now was really strong. So our local reserve unit in Goulburn was parading on Tuesday nights, and I figured that even while I was serving my HSC that I could squeeze that in the afternoons. So I signed up, started my application process, which took a few months, but I was parading well before the end of my last year in high school.
How'd that conversation go with your family?
I think it was fine. My mother particularly was always supportive of me pursuing my interests. I think she saw it as an opportunity for me to gain some structure and find some purpose in my life. So it was only part-time at that stage, so it wasn't a big commitment, but that very quickly changed over the following 18 months as I spent more and more time at the local reserve depot and went away on exercises and activities further and further abroad.
Did you go on training at the same time while doing the HSC?
The way the scheme works back then was as a reserve enlistee, you could parade at your depot before you completed your basic training under strict supervision. But in December that year, I went away to Kapuka and I finished my basic training shortly after sort of completing all of my HSE components and started in early 2004 as a fully qualified trooper in Armoured Corps.
Prior to signing up, it's a memory that a lot of us have. What can you tell us of your memory of 9/11?
September 11, 2001, I was just in high school, towards the back end of my high school years. I remember waking up very early one morning, it would have been, I suppose, 12th of September in Australia, as the television was sort of resonating with the effects and the impacts that was still unfolding. And it was definitely the hum of talk, the conversation on the school bus ride into high school. It's very clear and vivid in my mind now that happening, and particularly as a young man, that there's this real uncertainty around what it meant and the implications. It was a big driver for me, I think, in late 2003 and 2004 to then join the campaign in Afghanistan, and that call to action was what transitioned me from reserve service to full-time service. There was a desire for us to support the war that was being fought in Afghanistan, and I was ready to answer that call.
So once you joined, after you finished all your HSE, you first became a trooper reservist. What can you tell us what you did at the local depot?
Yeah, I did everything, every spare moment, and I had quite a few then as a young man. I spent at that depot putting my hand up for tasks. So as often as 5 times a week, I was down there for several hours a day servicing armoured vehicles and working on the latent fleet, putting my hand up to support full-time Army exercises as a sort of enemy party or a support staff. I even committed to 3 months at that stage to support the Defence National Distribution Centre in the deep maintenance of the M113 fleet, which was really engrossing and exciting experience to see that high level of maintenance and pulling apart. And I became a bit of a master of my craft there, learning stuff that I probably wouldn't normally learn as just a trooper, and just immerse myself in every chance to be involved in Armoured Corps and working with armoured vehicles. It's really exciting.
When you initially signed up, did you have any sort of direction that you wanted to go Armoured Corps or anything in particular?
No, fundamentally it was a marriage of convenience. The local depot was Armoured Corps, and there were quite a few community friends who were serving there, so there was that appeal. But I was embraced into the family very quickly, and I found a commonality with them. There were some other family members who were trying to steer me in different directions, but in the end, that appeal to deploy and serve as a young man was too great, and that's where I really found myself and found my identity, I think.
Have you got any key memories that you can share of your time there?
As a reservist?
As a reservist, or when you switched to full-time service in 2005?
Yeah, full-time service was a real roller coaster. Things happened fast. Reservist, I thought I had lots of spare time, and I could sort of throw that towards my passion. But once I pivoted to full-time, my time quickly evaporated, and it was then army time, and trying to scratch out time for myself was different. So I was deployed out in the field. I made lots of very good friends from all over Australia, who I still call close friends now. Whilst I was set on going to Afghanistan and supporting the war on terror then, I actually found myself rapidly deployed to East Timor. And that's probably one of the most vivid memories of, there was this focus and this drive towards this big threat in the Middle East. And then within 72 hours, we pivoted and turned to the local area of operations in East Timor, where there was a crisis happening. And the guys were deployed in 24 hours. They were loaded up on aircraft and flying over there. We were loaded up on ships within 72 hours and on the ground in under a week, which was really exciting and interesting. My first time working with the Navy was driving onto the ship to go to East Timor. So it's very vivid.
What can you tell us of that time when you left the ship for the first time with the armoured vehicles and you're in another country?
Wow, yeah, that was for a young man. I think I would have been maybe 20 at that stage. It was a really interesting and overwhelming, sensorily overwhelming. It's one of the first times that I'd actually been outside of Australia. I was on my own. The reality of what I was doing in the military was really hitting me. And that first 2 weeks that we're in East Timor was just a blur. I don't think I barely slept. I was wearing body armor constantly because at the time, there was a very real threat that there was militia in the area. So we were just doing everything we could with every waking moment to do good and make an impact. And I think that first 2 weeks that we're on the ground was really pivotal, and we made a significant change because the remaining time that I spent in East Timor was not as intense as those 2 weeks, which meant that we curbed that threat and we'd made an impact. But the exposure to a different culture that was very close to ours, and a culture and a community of people that were in need, being faced with an impoverished nation that had its democratic, it was under threat. Yeah, it was impactful, I think, and it really seeded with me that what I was doing was meaningful, and I think it drove me to the cause and to stay true to what I was doing.
What was it like being in an armoured vehicle over there compared to operating around your local depot?
Some would say excessive. So we were in Vietnam era equipment, so a lot of it was just barely sort of modern, I guess. But I had a real passion for this workhorse, the M113. Like I said, I'd spent months learning its ins and outs, and it was a role that I really enjoyed. It was a unique role in the military that wasn't broadly employed then. And it allowed us to have a really significant presence in East Timor. We could quickly, rapidly even, you would say, deploy to and respond to different threats. We could mobilize soldiers with relative protection. We were able to cross adverse terrain, and we were able to make a presence, which was needed at that time. I recognised as the campaign went on, that real hard presence was not needed, and we drew down very quickly. In fact, by the time I left East Timor, a lot of the armoured vehicles were being pulled out, and that was only 3 or 4 months later. So it was, I think, a necessary and impactful presence that made me feel safe, and I think was welcome at times by the local community because of the impact that it made.
Were there any good or challenging memories that you can share about your deployment there?
Yeah, I think the first one is to recognise that these were 1970s era Vietnam historical pieces that were at the end of their life. So we often fought maintenance challenges. We broke down at the worst of times. We found it very difficult to get parts, and we were often jerry-rigging bits and pieces. One situation I recall, there was an incident in the middle of the night where a number of flares were sent up to illuminate the nighttime area. And as we mobilised the vehicles, I actually threw track on my M113. My involvement in that response was stymied from the outset, but a far greater threat rolled in, because as the flares came to ground, they set fire to the paddock that I'd thrown track in, and there was this wall of fire sort of coming towards us as I rapidly tried to put together the bits and pieces of the M113 so we could move away from the threat. We were able to do that, knowing that if the fire had overwhelmed us, it would have been an even greater concern that an M113 was burned, containing ammunition, and it was largely a bit of a farcical incident, but we were able to fix the track under pressure, get out there, and then use the M113 to help subdue the fire, which was good. So all in all, it was a good result. But I remember pulling in all the skills of my training to really perform under pressure.
So after you finished up your deployment to East Timor, then you moved on to Afghanistan.
Yeah, the two trips were almost back to back. As I said, we left the M113s behind. They were at the end of their life, and our team quickly mobilised and upskilled on a new platform, the Protected Mobility Vehicle. So it was a new piece of equipment that was procured by defence to respond to the improvised explosive device threats that were experienced in Afghanistan. And our team was one of the second conventional forces deployed to the Middle East in Tarankot on this platform. Our SOPs and TTPs were still being developed. We were still learning the skills of our trade, coming from somewhere where we had decades of experience and a wealth of knowledge. Now we're expected to upskill and become masters of this new technology, this new platform, under a completely different threat, disaggregated, asymmetric war, supporting Afghans at that stage in the reconstruction task force, how we rebuild Tarankot ourselves to set the conditions so that they can do it themselves. So that was a real rapid turnaround. But fortunately for me, we deployed with a great infantry task group from the first battalion, and some of the guys that I worked with there went on to do phenomenally brave and dangerous things, and we were intimately supporting them through that uncertain time. And those relationships would go on to be long-serving professional relationships with the first battalion.
Did you draw any experiences from on your first deployment to Timor and then going to Afghanistan? Was there anything drawn from that experience that sort of helped you process and deal with the challenges and events that took place?
Great question, Thomas. I think there was a lot. I genuinely believe that if I'd been thrown straight into Afghanistan as my first deployment, it would have been a much more challenging experience for me because the threat was very real. It was omnipresent. It was unseen. In East Timor, it was much easier to sort of identify the threats and draw the lines. In Afghanistan, it was everywhere. It was all around you all the time. I was able to take on these new skills and challenges, I think, because I had a fairly good seating in my craft and what it was to be an Australian soldier deployed supporting local nationals. And the problem that we're solving in Afghanistan wasn't too dissimilar from the problem that we're solving in East Timor, and that we're helping local communities, we're engaging with them, and that they were in a similar state of dissonance, I guess. Their way of life was being broken down by this other force, militia force, who were trying to exert their will. So there were a lot of things that I was able to carry across as an individual, but the scale was just significantly more. It was the distances we were covering were greater. The threat was omnipresent. And then you add in this highly advanced understanding of tactics, asymmetric tactics, IEDs and ambushes and stuff, which it was a really learning experience. And I think we were very fortunate in our deployment to come away as safe as we were. We were able to operate and return home largely unscathed, which not all rotations in Afghanistan can say.
Was there a big difference for yourself going between the two deployments you saw there?
I think so. My role within the military, I think, was more certain. I'd proven myself, I guess you could say, and by that stage I was now one of the more senior soldiers. So I was taking leadership role, and I was able to act autonomously and utilize initiative. And I did spend a lot of time mentoring some of the newer soldiers who hadn't served in East Timor and didn't have the long background that I had with the previous platform M13. So everything was new to them. I was able to liken some of the new TTPs and the training to what we'd already done and carry some of that across. So I think for me, there was a lot that I could bring to the party that was valuable. Every day was a challenge in Afghanistan. A new lesson to learn. The quiet days were always the best and the worst. Best because you could really enjoy the serenity and the beauty of the place. Afghanistan still to this day strikes me as one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. The contrast between the desert and the mountains and the lush green belts was breathtaking. And I'll start with a great anecdote before I go to some of the more exciting ones. But I remember during one of our deployments, we were postured in an overwatch position, and we had the entire company strung out there before we were about to push down into one of our operations, and we're up on this finger in the middle of the desert. There was mountains, and below us was the green belt. But that night, we had a full moon, and it was strategically chosen because the infantry wanted to push into the green belt under the light of the full moon. But the moon was so big and so bright that it was like the middle of the day. We had shadows, and it was impossible for me to sleep, A, because I was excited about the pending operation, but B, I was just taken away by the beauty of it all. And that moment still resonates with me as one of the most serene and surreal experiences I've had anywhere at any time. But I suppose to some of the more juicier stories, one of our first times we struck out from the FOB on an operation was securing a bridge at 1 hour. 1 hour was conveniently 1 hour away from the FOB, but it was spelt differently. The 1 hour bridge was a key crossing point across one of the river systems there. And our job was to secure it so we could conduct operations forward and rearward and secure that key piece of terrain. The plan was to be there for about 5 days as we pushed other lines of operations forward. However, within the first 48 to 72 hours, the checkpoint was compromised by a suicide explosion. This individual had bypassed some of our security screens and managed to get themselves quite close to our position and detonated a suicide device there in the checkpoint. We were able to coordinate the event and utilize our tactics and techniques, and we got out of that incident with only a minor injury. But for me, as a young man, that was like, okay, like the mission's been compromised, so let's pack up and go home and find somewhere safe. But the mission was to stay there for another 4 days, and we had to secure that checkpoint. So for the remaining 4 days was highly tense as we all feared a recurrence of that day's threat, but everyone was highly professional. We secured that and maintained those lines of operations for another 4 days and came home safe without further incident. And that was one of our first operations out of the gate that really set the tone for the combat team going forward, that you can't let your guard down for a second, because the threat was everywhere and real. But also, just because something happens doesn't mean that you can pack up your bags and go home. We're here to do a job, and that was the mission came first. So whilst it was a pretty powerful and significant event that still resonates with me today, it really, I think it's seeded within me that we're there for a purpose, and it really helped me find courage later on when things got challenging.
How did you manage to decompress, not just yourself, but everyone you worked with as well, after witnessing an event like that? How did you manage to get on top of things and flush it all out?
Great conversations with all the guys. Humour just became a common tool that we used. I remember within hours of that incident, walking over to one of my mates and having a chat with him about how close it was, and we were able to laugh over a cigarette and a few minutes reprieve. And that, I think that laughter really helped us realize that we're in it for each other. But more broadly, after the incident and for the months that I was deployed in Afghanistan, I committed a lot of time to personal fitness and every spare moment that I could get to decompress. I'd put my headphones in, and I'd choose a piece of music and just and work it out, exercise it out, and spend a lot of time pounding the pavement around the base of Tarancot, running and decompressing that way. And I found that a really great strength for me when I was stressed or confused, to take control of something within myself.
You mentioned before that on your deployment, on the second one, that you took more of a sort of mentor role, mentoring the juniors and the new people, that this was probably their first deployment as well. Did that play a part into your next posting?
At that stage, I was set within myself. I wanted to be a recruit instructor. That was something that I was very passionate about at that point. I now had a degree of experience. I felt like I had something to give back. I wanted to become a recruit instructor. Unfortunately, because of a number of factors, that wasn't on my cards. It wasn't on my posting cycle, but I was blessed with getting a posting at the School of Armour, where it wasn't quite recruit instruction, but I was able to really provide the trade expertise of the lessons I'd learned and give back. I had experience as an M113 crewman which was a skill set that we were maintaining and supporting the infantry in their adoption of the infantry fighting vehicle. I had obviously the P&V experiences, which was a very unique skill set. And at that stage, I think largely rested with transport and infantry. So I was able to contribute there. And I had a number of dismounted skills as well. So I spent a lot of time becoming an expert cavalry scout and training and supporting our dismounted soldiers and giving them the context of East Timor and Afghanistan and working with armoured vehicles, which was really rewarding. Throughout that whole 3-year posting, I was able to then add another tool set to my belt as well. And I upskilled and became qualified on the ASLAV platform, which was something that I hadn't picked up and was a requirement of my trade as a cavalryman. And I spent hours out at the range honing my gunnery craft and becoming an expert marksman with the ASLAV platform. And I really enjoy those times where I could just go out and shoot and become proficient at myself, at my own individual skills.
How did you find the change of pace going from your deployments to then being an instructor?
Oh, there was no change of pace. Being an instructor is a full-time job. It was intense. We were often required to quickly mobilise and switch between different responsibilities, supporting field deployments, training, and soldiers in training. They work at a high tempo, so the instructors have to work at an even higher tempo. I jest in slight because there was a good amount of time for me to focus on my family and focus on myself outside of the hours because I was able to go home and spend time with them. In fact, that was the time that my partner and I decided that we wanted to start a young family. So Puckapunya was a great place for us to have that communication and build a community with friends who were at about a similar stage in their life. But it didn't stop. The mission still came first. When my son was born, I was actually out on an exercise and I was given 72 hours to come back, see the birth of my son, hold him for the first time, and then hand him to my mother-in-law before I went back outfield and finished the exercise because training doesn't stop. We need to support the operational continuum. That was challenging, but again, I wear that as a badge of pride because my partner was able to really demonstrate her resilience and her ability to overcome challenges then as well. That's been a great strength throughout our relationship and the rest of my career.
At what point did you decide to prepare yourself for the next challenge by going to RMC Duntroon?
This was a seed that was planted by one of my officer commanding before I went to the School of Armour. He planted the seed in my brain. He said, "You should do this. You should consider this." And the whole time I was at the School of Armour, it was something that I was mulling over and chewing over. And in the end, it became a point where I reflected on my career as a soldier, and I realised I'd done just about everything I could do. There was certainly a few things I could pursue, but I'd had a pretty good experience as a junior soldier, and the transition to officer would allow me to continue to give back and contribute to the soldiers and the military community. So when I was recommended to go to RMC, it was I was relieved that other people saw that in me as well, and I went on to the next challenge in my career, which was changing from a digger mindset to an officer mindset. And it's a real mind switch.
What can you tell us about that adaptation of being a digger, then going through RMC to be a staff cadet?
Well, it started with one of the greatest challenges, I think, in my life, which was I had to go back to basics. At that stage, the Royal Military College wanted to form this cohort mentality where we had shared experiences, and I understood that, but doing it was much harder. I'd already been through Kapuka and I deployed, and I had this wealth of experiences. So going back to basics and learning how to march again and doing things by numbers was a great personal challenge for me. And there are a number of other ex-serving soldiers in my cohort who it was too much for them. That challenge of resetting yourself and going back to basics was too much for them, and they didn't want to do that. But in the end, I got a lot of value out of, again, being able to mentor new soldiers who came through the continuum. I was able to lend my experiences when things were challenging, and I was able to really challenge myself, my humility, and test whether or not I actually did know the basics. So it was, and I think it was a good mental reset for me to say, well, that ends my soldier career, and from here on, this is my officer career, which I think was particularly necessary because I ended up choosing to come back to Armoured Corps. Not initially my plan. I was considering some of the other options that friends and family had recommended for me, and I thought this is my chance to spear out and explore those new horizons. But in the end, the call to Armoured Corps was too great, and in particular, it was the call of the M1 Abrams tank that was loudest of all. The great beasts on the battlefield that I'd seen and worked with side by side, but it was not something that I had the pleasure of experiencing. So I chose to graduate to become a tank troop leader, which was, I don't think I could have made a better choice. That was phenomenal. It was really great. And I really enjoyed every experience I had as a young troop leader within the tank stream.
Are there any good memories or challenges that you can share of your time at RMC?
Well, RMC is a very unique environment, and it is fraught with challenges. Probably the greatest challenge for me was the challenge within myself to be critical and introspect. I don't think I'd spend a lot of time on introspection and recognizing who I was as a leader and as a team player. I'd just been a digger and done what I was told to do. Now I was being asked to create my own leadership statements and understand who I was as a person. So that was really challenging for me. And I had quite a lot of conflicts with my peers about that search for a new identity, as I tried to shed the digger Gareth and move on to a young junior leader who was a peer. Sometimes I tried to run too fast and leave some of my peers behind. And while that worked for me as an individual, it wasn't the right outcome for the team. That challenge within myself, I think, was the greatest lesson I learned. And I made a lot of really good friendships out of stopping and focusing on how I can be a better team player and be a bit more true to myself.
So when you became a troop leader, did you work with anyone you'd previously worked with before?
Fortunately, because I'd chosen the tank stream as opposed to going back to cavalry, not as many as you would expect. A lot of them that I did meet again were senior soldiers or officers within the stream. So the conflicts weren't significant on a personal level. There were a number of individuals who I'd worked with from the School of Armour and through my career who I did cross paths with, and there may have been some personal challenges on both sides to overcome those preconceptions. But largely, the professionalism of the soldiers that I worked with and my ability to, based on those lessons that I learned at RMC, to identify with the person, I think allowed me to really overcome those challenges and seek the best outcome. A lot of the good senior soldiers that I worked with leveraged that. They said, look, sir, you know what it was like to be a soldier, so let's consider this with that in mind. And I appreciated that reminder that I could add those experiences to my leadership and not be brought down to be a digger, but empathise with them through experiences.
So following your time as a troop leader, what was next for you?
I wrapped up my time as a troop leader, tank commander at 2nd Cavalry Regiment. There was a chance for me to promote into a 2IC position and make way for the future troop leaders to take up the reins in that position. A lot of them took up that challenge with the promise that they were going to deploy on Operation Taji, which was one of the later operations to the Middle East. And I felt at that stage that I had my chance to deploy and served my operational experience. My family was now at a time where they were really appreciating my attention and time. So I embraced that 2IC role, second in command, and made way for those junior leaders to take that step in their command. What that meant was basically the whole of 2nd Cavalry Regiment deployed, and it was left with only a handful of soldiers who were unable to deploy or had, much like me, sort of chosen to take up those supporting roles and not deploy. There was a general feeling, particularly because most of the people who couldn't deploy were because of physical restrictions or employment restrictions, there was this feeling of being left behind, which was palpable. It was really hard for the guys who were left behind. And in my role, I spent a lot of time investing in these people to try and help them stay focused and seek purpose. Many of them were physically broken and had rehabilitation programs. Many of them were looking at transitioning out of defence, and they were faced with diverse and numerous personal challenges. Their relationships at times were fractured, and their sense of self and identity was also fractured. It was really difficult. And this was a new challenge that I could see that I could lean into and grow as well. A very valuable challenge to help Armoured Corps soldiers move to the next stage of their careers and their lives. So I assumed the role of Rear Details Welfare Officer. Required me to learn a lot about the medical process, a lot about the transition process. It also started, I suppose, the thought in myself that at one stage I'd be in the same situation as them. So I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't also a personal drive to understand this process, so I could help myself if the time came when I had to transition out of defence. And I spent a lot of time immersing myself in that transition piece and in that investing in people piece. I remember times when I was working with veterans and like named sort of individuals from the Corps who had this reputation and this almost all-like presence within the Corps because of their experiences, who were now faced at the end of their journey and didn't know what was next, didn't know what to do. And here I was, a barely 30-year-old young junior officer trying to give 45, 50-year-old men life advice on what comes next. And more often than not, it was a shared journey rather than me actually telling them what they should or shouldn't do.
Prior to that, had you had any idea of sort of having that welfare experience to share and mentor other people or help guide people on their journey of kind of facing the door and going, okay, what do I do? What options are there ahead of me? I
think it's a requisite of all leaders in defence to have an understanding of that and have a desire to help and get the most out of people. The military system spends a lot of time on personnel management, and good leaders spend a lot of their time there. There's a saying that 1% of your workforce will consume 99% of your time and effort. And that's because it's worth it. People are definitely worth it. So as I grew as a junior leader, I think more and more of myself resonated with that desire to help the guys who couldn't help themselves.
What was next for you after being the unit welfare officer?
There's a particular career path that the junior officers need to follow. And I was driven to taking up a posting at the Royal Military College. That's where I wanted to go. I wanted to be an instructor. I saw that as a great feather in my cap. But in order to align my posting cycles and make sure that I'd filled out my career sort of milestones, the next posting for me was actually within the 2nd Division as an officer supporting a reserve unit. It's one of the full-time members working for a part-time unit, which offered a whole new raft of challenges. I thought by that stage I knew all there was to know about leadership, and I was pretty au fait. But I'm glad I served that posting, because our reserve workforce is a completely different entity with their own needs and drives and motivations. And I saw a side of the contingent workforce that I think I'd undervalued as a full-time member. They were always there, yes, and I know they did good work, and I'd worked alongside them on multiple deployments, but I didn't appreciate all the hard work they put in to get there. These guys were working full-time jobs and then in their spare time committing to serve the Defence Force. And that takes significant effort and commitment. And the challenges that they face are many. They're often under-resourced, they're often understaffed, and they're often time poor, but they still manage to make that time and make that commitment. So my role there within the 2nd Division was to help them as best I could do what they needed to do and pull away the governance barriers and create the opportunities for them to do great work. That was a challenge. It was a challenge every day to do that, because the reserve workforce is not the priority. deployments and operational forces are the priority, they get their lion's share. So it was doing the impossible with very little, but their motivation and passion really made that job rewarding and a pleasure to do.
During your time with the reservists, this is the time that you also became involved with WithYouWithMe.
Yeah. I'd heard about WithYouWithMe actually before leaving second Cavalry Regiment, when I was working with soldiers transitioning out, and I'd been engaged with them. I'd heard the name, and I was curious to know more. This seemed like a great opportunity to help soldiers transition into a new career. So I've been doing some research, and I've been engaging different people. And WithYouWithMe at that stage was still a pretty new name. As I served within the 2nd Division, I heard more and more about them. They were becoming more active. They had a number of talent expos around Australia, and I made the effort to get involved, to learn more about them and find out more. And I became immediately attracted to the mission. This idea of solving underemployment within veterans, and it resonated with me. And straight away, I started formulating ways that the Army could be more involved, and how we could use the reserve force to better be engaged through. There was a number of other initiatives, and I was trying to align partnerships. I reached out to the WithYouWithMe community, and I said, look, I want to be part of this mission. I want to be involved. At that stage, it was a pretty young initiative, and unless I was wanting to take up a career in technology, that it wasn't particularly space for them in that model. So I continued doing the good work, I guess, while I wore the uniform and communicating all the value of this program as far and as broadly as I could. In the background, I suppose motivated by the reservists that I saw who were able to work full-time and still commit to things that they were passionate about, I started training in technology and getting some of the skills that WithYouWithMe offered free to the veterans community. And I upskilled in robotics process automation. I did some cyber training. I did some data training and started to explore these technology opportunities. And I was championing it back to the workforce, saying, hey, look, here's a great chance for us to use these future technologies to help the Army see outcomes. I was absolutely impassioned to try and help the Army utilise this resource the best way it could. I say Army, but I think the Defence Force across the whole, because when it came down to it, and I did eventually transition out of defence once I'd served my 15 years and I'd come to a natural transition point. I think I engaged with the Navy in helping them support their robotics process automation journey through the skills that I'd used, and I took up a role there. And the Navy is certainly leading the way in that innovation piece. They've got a lot of great technologies and skills on the horizon as they try and make the most of their workforce. So it's not a unique Army problem. It's Defence Force wide is going through a technological change, and that's great and exciting. But I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
So after your time with 2Div, then you, on your pathway to becoming an RMC instructor, you then became a career advisor. After your time there, then you got to finally where you're working towards being an instructor at RMC. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, instructor at RMC. I think I've said this about every single posting, but it was one of the most rewarding and challenging postings of my career. I'd finally made that milestone that I had been driving for since becoming a junior officer. It meant that I had to be an expert in my craft. It meant that I had to invest in people always. And it meant that I had to work really, really hard across a new and complex skill set. I worked really, really hard at RMC until the end of March. 3 months I was instructing there on a whole broad skill set in the second class. And then in March 2020, COVID struck. As it struck the world. In fact, for us, we were deployed out on a field exercise, one of the training milestones for the second class cadets there, and we came back to COVID. We'd been in a bit of a bubble, just focused on our internal training, and we came back to toilet paper shortages and lockdowns and a whole new way of doing business, and it was all uncertain. Training was moving from face-to-face to virtual, and no one really knew what the future would hold. I was immediately removed from instructor duties and responsibilities as that changed and deployed on the COVID-19 response Taskforce in the ACT or the federal government. That meant that I worked at the Royal Military College of Australia headquarters, helping develop the contingency plans and the future plans for what instructing at RMC would look like. That meant that I went and worked at the ACT or federal government headquarters on contingency and operation planning for future deployment of defence forces in support of COVID response. And then it meant that I got seconded to the National Indigenous Australians Agency to help them protect the most vulnerable of our remote communities and help them manage the way that they spin up these short notice task force and responses. Very, very challenging role because everything was uncertain. And I was working with joint forces and federal government people and civilians and in areas that I was absolutely not an expert in, but working very, very hard for very meaningful outcomes. It was a challenge that I don't think that I could have ever been prepared for, but if I enjoyed every day being able to contribute to supporting the national response to this new and emerging threat. A lot of hard work, but completely disrupted my dream posting at RMC. It took me away, and when I finally came back from that COVID response task force, the landscape had completely changed. A lot of my contingency plans were in action. We were operating virtually. We were training differently. Some soldiers were held out in the field because it meant that we could get meaningful instruction and training. So it was a different landscape, and I was really tired. 15 years sort of ticked over, and I felt like it was as good a milestone as anything. I had plenty of feathers in my cap. I'd done just about everything, and I don't think there's much more you could ask for in a 15-year career. So I took 6 months long service leave to find myself and take a breather, with the intention of at that stage coming back as an instructor at RMC in 2021. It would have been. During those 6 months, I developed a new routine, lots and lots of gym. I spent 2-3 hours a day at the gym, investing in myself, reading broadly philosophy and books, and spending lots of time with my kids who throughout my 15-year career had seen snippets of me and seen me focused on work. So this was a chance for me to focus on them.
You achieved a lot in your 15 years. When was it time that you're like, okay, I'm actually thinking it's time to sort of stop going full time and start tapering things back even more?
The thought process probably started in about 2017. So the planning for the future, setting the milestones and making sure the conditions were set. September that year, so 3 months into my long service leave, that I got the opportunity to support the Digital Navy project with RPA, and I took the opportunity with about a week's consideration. I'd worked with soldiers who didn't have a transition plan. I'd worked with soldiers who faced with this opportunity and a lot of decisions to be made in short succession. It was at that stage that I'd set in my mind the milestones that I wanted to achieve. And by the time September 2020 come around, I was able to go through and say, yeah, I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve. I've set the conditions for this transition. I've got the skill sets I need. Here's a job opportunity that I can transition to. It's a meaningful career with an organization that resonates with my values. I'd spent some time on self-reflection and self-introspection, and I knew what I valued. I valued spending time with my children. I valued investing in humans and digital technology innovation. So everything was there for me to make that decision. So to say that I only took a week's consideration to make that decision transition, I think is a bit of a misleading statement. I've been thinking about it for about 5 years at that stage, or 4 years. I had a plan and the conditions were set. So it was just validation that this was the right decision for me. It wasn't some golden opportunity. It actually involved a cut in my pay, but it was a meaningful transition. And that's the key that I say for people is don't expect that there's going to be this golden basket opportunity. You've got to go for the work that you would do anyway, the work that you see purpose and drive, because that's what's going to get you out of bed every morning. And this project with the Navy was something that I saw had outcomes at Career Management Agency. It's a project that I saw had outcomes at the contingent workforce level. It's a project that I saw had outcomes in the future of the Defence Force as a whole. So all those things, I wanted to be a part of the project. So I probably would have done it for free if I could, because it was a really, really exciting innovation project where instead of just saying, well, that's the way we've always done business, we're saying, well, no, this is the way we can do business. After 12 months of supporting the Navy project, I was looking for more involvement with you, with me, and now I stepped into a new role, a customer success executive, and that role means that I get to place veterans into opportunities like that every day. I get to connect with veterans, military spouses, neurodiverse people, the marginalised and underrepresented within the workforce, and connect them with meaningful work every single day. And I absolutely love that. And I'm so glad that I get the privilege of that after the experiences that I've had to connect veterans with great opportunities and put them into meaningful work.
How would someone get involved with you, with me?
Good question, Thomas. With You, With Me is a social impact company. Our underlying mission statement is to solve underemployment in these marginalised groups. And to do that, we connect with these diversity groups and give them access to training and career opportunities for free. We put the costs onto the workforce. We put the costs onto industry to solve this problem. So for veterans particularly, all of our training and all of these career opportunities are absolutely free. It's people like me who engage with these communities, veterans, and help them find those opportunities in career. And to date, I couldn't count how many veterans I've put into great opportunities in technology where they probably never would have considered. Well, because we give them the training for free and we connect them with these industries who are looking for them to employ them in meaningful work across all of our partners who really appreciate the potential that veterans have. The best place to start is to look up With You, With Me. That's where I started, was I just heard about it and I looked it up. And the more I looked into it, the more I got involved, the more I found valuable and rewarding. I encourage anyone, if you're asking, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect you with opportunities and training and answer any of your questions, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. I always have been, particularly for veterans, in helping them find a meaning after service.
Gareth, thank you for your service and the work that you're doing in the veteran space.
Thank you, Thomas.
I'm Thomas Kaye, and you've been listening to Life on the Line.
Our thanks go to Gareth and With You, With Me for the interview. Be sure to look up the company online. For more stories of cavalry veterans, you can listen to some of our older episodes. In Season 1, Number 3, Garth Callender.
A bomb which was in a car parked on the side of the road detonated as we went past, so we were within a few metres of the bomb that went off.
And in Season 3, Number 58, Kane Hall.
I just remember driving and suddenly there was an orange flash. Everything went black. Smoke burning my nostrils, lungs, everything. And this feeling of my body being compressed and this instant feeling of guilt. Oh, fuck. What did I just do? What happened?
And Number 62, Oliver Andrews.
I say I checked out mentally. I just became a depressive, angry wreck.
For more about the COVID-19 Taskforce, you can listen to our Season 4 bonus episode, COVID-19 Taskforce, with John Frewen.
Unfortunately, with what's been going on in Victoria, we're now right back to very intense activities. This is very much a fight on the home front.
Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Life on the Line Podcast, on Twitter at LOTL Pod, and on LinkedIn at Thistle Productions. Our website is www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thank you for listening, and lest we forget.